I stepped out of the Rolls-Royce Phantom in a $10,000 tuxedo, watching the blood drain from my daughter-in-law's face as she realized the homeless janitor she kicked out was the billionaire buying her estate. The ballroom went silent as I took off my mask. The man who threw my grandson's medicine in the mud was now kneeling in front of me, begging for a loan I had already foreclosed on. They thought I was a broke old man living in a shack. They forgot I was the CEO of the holding company that owned their mortgage, and I was here to collect. Before I show you the eviction notice, hit subscribe. This is the story of the masquerade. The heater in my 1998 Ford F-150 hasn't worked since the Bush administration. It rattles like a dying smoker, spitting out dust instead of warmth. But tonight, the cold inside the cab was nothing compared to the frost settling in the pit of my stomach. I checked the time on the dashboard clock. The digital numbers were half faded, but I could make out 11:42 p.m. My phone sat in the cup holder, a burner, cheap plastic. The screen was cracked. It was the only way Mark knew how to reach me. When he had called 10 minutes ago, he hadn't even said hello. He just sobbed. A grown man, 30 years old, weeping so hard he couldn't form words. He managed to choke out a location. Centennial Park, the North Bench. Please, Dad. I downshifted, the gearbox grinding a protest as I took the corner too sharp. I play the part well. To the world, I am Arthur Pendleton, a retired school janitor living on a meager pension and Social Security checks that barely cover the electric bill. I wear flannel shirts stained with engine grease. I have calluses on my hands that could strike a match. I drive a truck that looks like it belongs in a scrapyard because it helps me disappear. It helps me watch. But tonight, the mask was slipping. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, not from the cold, but from the pressure of my grip. I could feel the leather cover tearing under my fingers. I pulled up to the curb of Centennial Park. It was a manicured stretch of green in the center of the city, surrounded by steel and glass monoliths that scraped the sky. The streetlights here were golden and warm, designed to make the rich feel safe while they walked their poodles, but at midnight, the shadows were long and sharp. I saw them immediately. It was a sight that would haunt me until the day I put Preston Sterling in the ground. Mark was sitting on a wrought iron bench, curled inward like a dying insect. He was wearing a t-shirt, just a thin white cotton t-shirt, in November. The wind was whipping off the harbor, cutting through the city streets like a knife, and my son was out there in summer clothes. Next to him, on the ground, was a black hefty trash bag, knotted at the top. It looked half empty, but it was what was on his lap that made my vision blur with red static. Leo, my grandson, 6 years old. He was wrapped in Mark's blazer, the only piece of warm clothing between the two of them, but his small legs were bare. He was asleep, or passed out from exhaustion, clutching a teddy bear that looked like it had been dragged through the mud. I killed the engine. The silence of the truck dying was instantly replaced by the howl of the wind. I didn't run. I walked. Slow, deliberate. Every step on the pavement sounded like a gavel hitting a block. Mark looked up as I approached. His face was a ruin. His eyes were swollen shut. His lips blue and cracked. When he saw me, saw the stained work boots and the frayed Carhartt jacket, he didn't look relieved. He looked ashamed. "Dad," he croaked. His teeth were chattering so hard the word broke in half. "I'm sorry. I didn't know who else to call." I stopped in front of him. I didn't hug him. Hugs are for comfort, and we were past comfort. We were in survival. "Where is she?" I asked. My voice was gravel, low and flat. Mark looked down at Leo, pulling the blazer tighter around the boy's shoulders. She's at the tower. She stayed." "She stayed?" "Preston made her choose," Mark whispered, the shame burning his cheeks bright red. "He told her the accounts were frozen. The cards were cut. He said if she walked out the door with us, she was walking out of the will. She's used to the lifestyle, Dad. She couldn't do it. She just stood there." I looked up.
Directly across the park, looming over us like a tombstone, was the Sterling Tower, 50 stories of arrogant glass and steel. The penthouse lights were on. I could almost feel the heat radiating from up there, the smell of expensive scotch and old money. And the boy? I pointed at Leo. She let him kick out the boy? Mark flinched. Preston said, he said Leo wasn't a Sterling. He said he was mongrel stock. He told Vanessa that Leo's blood was muddying the legacy. He said if she wanted to secure her future with the Viscount, she had to cut the dead weight. Muddying the legacy. I felt a vein pulse in my neck. It was a sharp, rhythmic thud. The Viscount? I asked. Some European guy. De Vere's, I think. Preston's been setting it up for months. I thought it was just business dinners. I didn't know they were interviewing my replacement. Mark let out a dry sob. He gave us 10 minutes, Dad. He had security stand over us while we packed. They didn't let me take Leo's coat. They said it was bought with sterling money, so it stays at the estate. I looked at the trash bag. And that? My clothes. What I could grab. And the bear. Mark looked down at the dirty toy in Leo's arms. Security grabbed it. One of the guards, he ripped it out of Leo's hands, threw it in a puddle on the way out the gate, said trash belongs with trash. I had to dig it out of the gutter because Leo wouldn't stop screaming. I closed my eyes for a second. I needed to calibrate. If I opened my mouth now, I wouldn't speak. I would roar. And a janitor doesn't roar. A janitor endures. I took off my heavy jacket. I'm an old man, but I'm built like a twisting oak root. I wrapped the jacket around Mark's shoulders. He tried to refuse, but I shoved him back. Shut up, I said. Pick him up. Mark nodded, his hands shaking as he scooped Leo into his arms. The boy stirred, whimpering. Grandpa? Leo's voice was tiny, weak. I'm here, kid, I said. I've got you. I'm cold, he whispered. I know. We're going to the truck. I grabbed the trash bag. It weighed nothing. A man's entire life, reduced to 5 pounds of plastic. We walked to the Ford. I opened the passenger door and helped them inside. Mark huddled against the door, pulling Leo into his chest to share body heat. I walked around to the driver's side, but before I got in, I stopped. I turned back to the Sterling Tower. From the park, it looked impenetrable, a fortress of wealth. I knew Preston Sterling was up there right now. He was probably celebrating. He had trimmed the fat. He had removed the embarrassment of a son-in-law who came from peasant stock, and a grandson who wasn't purebred enough for his delusions of aristocracy. He thought he had won. He thought he had discarded them into the void, where they would disappear into the poverty he despised. He saw a janitor's son and a broken man. He didn't know about Zurich. He didn't know that the Orion Capital Group, which held the liens on his precious tower, was run from a laptop hidden behind a wall of rusty tools in a shack 3 hours away. He didn't know that the debt he was drowning in wasn't owed to a bank. It was owed to me. I stared up at the penthouse balcony. I imagined Preston standing there, looking down at the ants in the park. Enjoy the view, Preston, I thought, the cold wind feeling like a caress against my skin now, because you just evicted your only safety net. I climbed into the truck and slammed the door. The cab smelled of old coffee and wet dog, a smell I cultivated carefully. Where are we going? Mark asked, his teeth still chattering. Dad, I have no money. I can't pay you for gas. I don't know what we're going to do. I turned the key. The engine coughed, whined, and then roared to life with a sound like a dying tractor. I cranked the heat up, knowing it would take 10 minutes to even start blowing lukewarm air. We're going home, I said. To the cabin? Mark hesitated. Is there enough room? I don't want to put you out. I put the truck in gear. My hand brushed against the glove compartment. Inside, hidden under a stack of unpaid bills and fast food napkins, was a Glock 19 and a ledger worth $400 million. There's room, I said, pulling away from the curb. Don't worry about the money, Mark. We'll figure something out. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The Sterling Tower began to shrink in the distance, but the light from the penthouse seemed to burn brighter, a beacon of greed in the dark. Did he sign anything? I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. What? Blinked Mark, groggy. Preston, did he make you sign anything when he kicked you out? A surrender of rights? An NDA? Mark shook his head. No, he just laughed. He said,
He said lions don't make contracts with sheep. He just told security to toss us. I tightened my grip on the wheel. A small, dark smile touched the corners of my mouth. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who just realized the prey forgot to lock the cage. "Good," I said softly. "Why is that good?" Mark asked, leaning his head against the cold window. "Because," I said, watching the city lights blur into streaks of neon, "it means he thinks we're dead already." I drove toward the highway, leaving the world of gold and glass behind, heading toward the darkness of the countryside. The rage in my gut wasn't cold anymore. It was a furnace, and it needed fuel. "Sleep, Mark," I commanded. "You're going to need your strength." "For what?" he mumbled, his eyes closing as the rhythm of the road took over. "For the cleanup," I said, but he was already asleep. I checked the mirror one last time. Leo was shifting, burrowing into his father's warmth. He looked so small, so fragile, muddying the bloodline. I reached into my pocket and touched the cold metal of a flash drive I always kept on me. It contained the encryption keys to the Shell Corporation that owned 85% of Preston Sterling's liquidity. I drove into the night, the old truck rattling, carrying a king disguised as a pauper, ready to burn the castle down. The cabin sat at the end of a 3-mile dirt road that washed out every time it rained. It was a small, sad structure made of graying timber and corrugated tin, huddled under the tree line like it was afraid of the sky. To the untrained eye, it was the final resting place of a man who had lost at the game of life. To me, it was the perfect blind. I killed the headlights. The darkness of the woods swallowed us whole. "We're here," I said. Mark stared out the window at the shack. I saw his throat bob as he swallowed hard. He remembered this place from the few times he'd visited over the years. Visits that were always cut short because Vanessa couldn't stand the smell of damp wood. "Dad, Mark started, then stopped. "It's late. We shouldn't have come. You barely have space for yourself. Grab the boy," I said, ignoring him. I unlocked the front door, a flimsy piece of plywood with a sticky lock, and ushered them inside. The air in the cabin was stale and frigid. I didn't have central heating. I had a wood stove in the corner that required constant feeding. "Put him on the couch," I instructed. Mark laid Leo down gently on the sunken plaid sofa I'd bought at a Goodwill in 1995. The cushions were flat, and the fabric smelled of dust. I threw a scratchy wool blanket over the boy. He didn't move. He was exhausted. "Sit," I told Mark, pointing to the small kitchen table covered in a plastic tablecloth. "I'll make food." "We're not hungry," Mark lied. His stomach growled loud enough to echo in the quiet room. He blushed, looking down at his hands. I went to the kitchenette. My kintry was a single shelf above the sink. I grabbed 2 styrofoam cups of instant noodles, beef flavor, and a kettle. I filled the kettle from the tap, the pipes groaning and shuddering as the water came out brown for a second before clearing up. I watched Mark while the water boiled. He was looking around the room, taking in the peeling wallpaper, the single bulb hanging from the ceiling, the stack of old newspapers by the door. I could see the guilt eating him alive. He thought he had dragged his son from a palace to a hovel. He thought he was ruining my meager retirement. Good, I thought. Let him feel the contrast. It will make the ascent sweeter. I poured the water. The smell of cheap sodium and fake spices filled the room. I slid a cup in front of him and handed him a plastic fork. "Eat." Mark stared at the noodles. A tear leaked out and splashed into the broth. He wiped it away angrily. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I know you're on a fixed income. I know you barely scrape by. I'll find day labor tomorrow. I'll pay you back for this." "It's 70 cents, Mark," I said, sitting opposite him with my own cup. "Just eat." He ate like a starving animal. He shoveled the hot noodles into his mouth, burning his tongue but not caring. It was the first time I realized they hadn't just been kicked out tonight. They had been neglected for a while. "You don't eat like that if you had dinner." "When was the last time you ate?" I asked quietly. Mark paused, a noodle hanging from his lip. "Breakfast, maybe?" "Vanessa stopped the kitchen staff from serving us 3 days ago, said the budget was tight." I gripped my plastic fork until it snapped. I set the pieces down calmly. "Tell me everything." Mark pushed the empty cup away. The warmth of the food seemed to loosen his tongue. "Preston is drowning, Dad," Mark said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper.
The sterling lifestyle, it's all smoke and mirrors. He's leveraged to the hilt. The yacht, the cars, the estate, it's all on credit, and the creditors are calling. I nodded slowly, feigning ignorance. So he's broke. Worse, he's insolvent. He needs a massive injection of liquid cash within the month, or the whole house of cards collapses. That's where the Viscount comes in. The European? Viscount Henry de Vere. Mark spat the name out like poison. He's got old money, real money, but he wants a title in the States, connections to the New York elite. Preston sold Vanessa. And she agreed? Mark looked at the sleeping form of Leo. She didn't just agree, she auditioned. Preston told her that the sterling name was the only thing that mattered. He told her that if the money ran out, she'd be like us, like you. Mark looked at me, eyes filled with apology. No offense, Dad. None taken, I said. She couldn't handle the thought of being poor, Mark continued. So when Preston told her that Leo and I were liabilities that scare off potential suitors, she made a choice. She chose the check, I said. She looked right at me, Mark whispered. We were in the library. Leo was crying because he was hungry. She looked at me and said, "Love is for children, Mark. Survival is for adults. Get out." The silence that followed was heavy. The wind rattled the loose window pane in the kitchen. Survival. I repeated. She thinks she's saving the family, Mark said, rubbing his face. Preston has some big gala this weekend, the masquerade. That's where they're announcing the engagement. That's where De Vere's is signing the partnership deal. Once that ink is dry, Preston gets the capital to pay off his debts, and Vanessa gets to be a viscountess. I leaned back in my creaking wooden chair. The pieces were falling into place. Preston wasn't just cruel, he was cornered. And a cornered animal is predictable. He needed this gala to go perfectly. He needed the illusion of perfection to court the Viscount's money. He had cast Mark and Leo out to clean the stage for his performance. He thinks he's in the clear, Mark muttered, exhaustion finally pulling his eyelids down. He thinks he's won. I stood up and took the empty noodle cups. Let him think that. Dad? Mark looked up, confused by my tone. I softened my face, returning to the mask of the tired old janitor. I mean, there's nothing we can do tonight, son. The rich play by different rules. We just have to survive, right?
Mark nodded, defeated. Right. Survive. Take the bed, I said, pointing to the small bedroom in the back. I'll sleep in the chair. I can't take your bed. Take the damn bed, Mark. Leo needs a mattress. He didn't fight me. He picked up Leo, who murmured in his sleep, and carried him into the back room. I heard the springs squeak as they settled in. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. I listened to the rhythm of their breathing. Slow, deep. They were out. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the woods were pitch black. No streetlights, no security cameras, just the wild. Preston Sterling needed a cash injection to pay off his creditors. He was banking everything on this Viscount. He thought his debts were scattered across various banks, faceless institutions that would give him extensions if he smiled pretty. He didn't know that 3 years ago, when his stock dipped, a holding company called Herein Capital bought his debt for pennies on the dollar. He didn't know that Herein Capital was run by a man who cleaned toilets at the local high school for 20 years just to keep his hands busy. I looked at the pantry shelf where the instant noodles sat. Behind the box of saltines, there was a small latch hidden in the wood. I wasn't a janitor tonight. I wasn't a father tonight. I was the repo man, and payment was due. The silence in the cabin was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the cooling wood stove and the soft, desperate snoring of my son in the other room. I stood by the bedroom door for a long moment, listening. Mark's breathing was jagged, catching every few seconds as if his body was still bracing for a blow. Leo was quiet, too quiet. I checked my watch. 1:15 a.m. It was time to go to work. I didn't change out of my flannel shirt or my grease-stained work pants. The costume was necessary, even when no one was watching. Paranoia is a muscle. If you don't flex it, it atrophies. I pulled on my heavy boots, lacing them tight, and grabbed a rusty flashlight from the hook by the door. I stepped out into the night. The cold hit me like a physical slap, the temperature having dropped well below freezing. The wind howled through the pines, a lonely, mournful sound that usually made me feel at peace. Tonight, it sounded like a war cry. I walked 50 yards behind the cabin to the structure I called the shed. To any casual observer or tax assessor, it was a dilapidated storage unit that should have been condemned in the 90s. The roof sagged dangerously in the middle. The wood was gray and splintering, covered in moss that looked like gangrene. The door hung crooked on one hinge, requiring a specific lift and shove motion to open. I performed the maneuver, lifting the door and sliding inside. The smell of gasoline, old sawdust, and wet earth filled my nose. It was the smell of poverty, the smell of a man who fixes his own lawnmower because he can't afford a new one. I clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dust motes, eliminating a wall of pegboard cluttered with tools that had seen better days. Rusted wrenches, a saw with missing teeth, a coil of garden hose that had been patched with duct tape. I walked to the back wall, where a collection of garden rakes and shovels hung in a disorganized cluster. I reached for a specific garden hoe, the one with the cracked handle. I didn't pull it off the wall. I twisted it 90 degrees to the left, then pushed it in. Click. The distinct metallic sound echoed from behind the wall. It wasn't the sound of wood. It was the sound of a magnetic lock disengaging. I gripped the edge of the pegboard and pulled. The entire section, tools and all, swung outward on hidden, heavy-duty hinges. The smell of gasoline vanished, replaced by the sterile scent of ozone and conditioned air. Inside the hidden alcove was a small, frantic workspace. It was insulated, soundproofed, and climate-controlled by a silent ventilation system that vented underground. Sitting on a steel desk was a ruggedized Panasonic Toughbook and a silver briefcase. I sat down in the Aeron chair, the only luxury I allowed myself in this godforsaken zip code, and opened the briefcase. Inside sat an Iridium satellite phone and a secure hardware token. I opened the laptop. It didn't run Windows. It ran a custom Linux kernel designed for one thing: secure, encrypted communication with the banking capital of the world. I typed in a 64-character password from memory. The screen flared to life, a stark blue terminal window. I picked up the sat phone. I didn't dial a number. I pressed a single speed dial button, labeled Zurich. It rang once. "Secure line active," a voice said. It was crisp, accented, and devoid of sleepiness, despite it being 7 a.m. in Switzerland. "Victor," I said. My voice wasn't the gravelly mumble of Arthur the janitor anymore. It was sharp, commanding. It was the voice that had built empires and destroyed competitors in the 80s before I decided to vanish. "Mr. Pendleton," Victor replied. There was a slight rustle of papers on his end. "We weren't expecting a check-in until the quarterly review. Is the asset compromised?" "The asset is fine," I said, staring at the blinking cursor on my screen. "The situation has changed. I need you to run a diagnostic, immediate priority. Target: Sterling Holdings, New York, Preston Sterling." There was a pause. I could hear keyboard clatter on the other end, the sound of millions of dollars of data mining software spinning up. "Sterling," Victor mused. "Mid-cap luxury real estate and legacy investments. Flashy, overextended. We've flagged them as high risk for 3 quarters now. I want a deep dive, Victor. I don't care about his public filings. I want the shadow books. I want to know his liquidity, his leverage ratio, and most importantly, I want to know who owns his paper." "Give me 2 minutes," Victor said. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the desk. I leaned back, my eyes fixed on the progress bar on my screen as Zurich synchronized with my terminal. I thought about Preston Sterling. I thought about the way he had thrown a 6-year-old boy's teddy bear into the mud. Men like Preston didn't understand money. They thought money was a toy. They thought it was a shield. They didn't understand that money is a weapon, and like any weapon, if you don't respect it, it will blow your hand off. Preston had been borrowing to maintain an image. That much was obvious. But borrowing from whom? "Sir?" Victor's voice cut through my thoughts. "Go ahead." "It's messy," Victor said. "Sterling is effectively insolvent. He's been robbing Peter to pay Paul for 5 years. He's leveraged the commercial properties to float the residential estate, and he's leveraged the estate to pay the interest on the commercial loans." "The debt," I said, leaning forward. "Who holds the notes?" Well, that's the interesting part, Victor said. Originally, it was a syndicate. Chase, Citi, a few private equity firms. But about 18 months ago, the debt was bundled and sold off as a distressed asset package. Toxic waste, the street called it. No one wanted to touch it because the collateral was overvalued. Who bought it? A shell company out of the Caymans called Nebula Ventures. I frowned. The name sounded familiar, but I had hundreds of shells. Who was behind Nebula? Digging now, Victor said. Nebula is a subsidiary of... Wait, Nebula is wholly owned by Apex Global Solutions. My eyes widened slightly. Apex. And Apex? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Apex is a holding of the Orion Trust, Victor said. His voice changed. It became quieter, more reverent. Sir, we are the Orion Trust. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs in a slow, cold hiss. Are you certain? 100%. I'm looking at the ledger now. We acquired the sterling debt package in the Q3 bulk buy of distressed New York real estate. We picked it up for, my God, 12 cents on the dollar. I looked at the screen as the file transferred over. I opened the PDF. There it was, the breakdown. Creditor, Orion Capital, via Nebula/Apex. Debtor, Sterling Holdings/Preston Sterling. Total outstanding, $420 million. Status, default imminent. I scrolled down to the collateral section. My finger traced the lines on the screen. Item 1, 440 Park Avenue Commercial Tower. Item 2, the Sterling Estate, Land and Structures. Item 3, Personal Chattel, Vehicles, Art, Jewelry. I started to laugh. It was a dry, rasping sound that bounced off the steel walls of my hidden fortress. I didn't just own his loans. I owned him. Preston Sterling was walking around that mansion acting like a king, sipping wine that I technically owned, sleeping in a bed that was collateral for a loan he hadn't paid in 3 months. He was a squatter, a trespasser in a house that belonged to the janitor he had just humiliated at the front gate. Victor, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Yes, sir? What are the terms of the default? Aggressive, Victor replied. Since it was a distressed asset purchase, the covenants are strict. If he misses a payment or if his liquidity drops below a certain threshold, we can call the note immediately. Full repayment due within 24 hours or we foreclose. It's a shark hook clause. Has he missed a payment? He's 30 days late on the October tranche. He's technically in breach right now. We just haven't enforced it because, well, it's usually not worth the legal fees for a property that size. We were likely planning to sell the debt again next quarter. Do not sell it, I commanded. Flag the account. Freeze it. No one touches this file but me. Understood. Sir, do you want us to initiate foreclosure proceedings? I looked at the picture of the Sterling estate attached to the file. It was a beautiful house. A symbol of power. No, I said softly. Not yet. I want to let him hang himself first. Sir? He's looking for a savior, Victor. He thinks he's found one in a European viscount. He's going to throw a party this Saturday to sign a deal that he thinks will pay us off. Do you want me to block the deal? No, I said. I want to be the one who signs it. I could feel Victor's confusion over the line, but he knew better than to ask. I was the chairman. I played 4D chess while the rest of the world was playing checkers. Prepare a new identity package, I ordered. Create a front for a representative of Orion Capital, someone high level, someone with the authority to restructure the entire debt. Who will be the representative? My lawyer. Have Stone fly in tomorrow. But Victor, yes? Send the suit, the Italian one, and the mask, the Venetian one I bought at the auction in '98. The masquerade mask, sir? Yes, it's time for a party. Consider it done. I hung up the phone. The connection severed and the silence rushed back in. I sat there for a long time, staring at the glowing screen. 85%. I owned 85% of the air Preston Sterling breathed. I closed the laptop. The darkness returned. I spun the chair around and exited the false room, pushing the pegboard wall back into place until the magnetic lock clicked shut. I hung the rusty garden hoe back on its hook. I walked back to the cabin. The wind was still howling, but now it didn't sound like a war cry. It sounded like applause. I entered the cabin and took off my boots. I walked to the bedroom and looked down at Mark and Leo. They were still sleeping, huddled together for warmth. Mark had spent his whole life thinking he wasn't good enough for the Sterlings. He thought he was trash because his bank account was empty. I reached out and gently pulled the blanket up over Leo's shoulder. "Sleep tight, little prince," I thought. "Your grandfather just bought you a kingdom." The morning sun didn't bring warmth, it just illuminated the frost. I woke to the sound of coughing, not the dry, clearing the throat kind, but the wet, rattling wheeze of a small set of lungs struggling to pull in air. I was out of the chair and in the bedroom before my boots hit the floor. Leo was sitting up in the bed, his face pale, his lips taking on a bluish tint. He was clutching his chest, his small ribcage heaving with every desperate breath. Mark was next to him, rubbing his back, panic etched into every line of his face. "He needs the nebulizer," Mark said, his voice cracking, "or the rescue inhaler. Dad, he's tightening up." "Where is it?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "The bag," Mark said, frantically dumping the contents of the black trash bag onto the floor. "I thought I grabbed it. I swear I grabbed it." Old t-shirts, a pair of worn sneakers, a few socks tumbled out. No inhaler. Mark looked up at me, terror in his eyes. "It was on the nightstand. When the security guard grabbed me, I must have left it. Dad, he can't breathe." I looked at Leo. The boy was panicking, which only made the asthma worse. His eyes were wide, pleading. "Calm down," I said, my voice low and steady. I put a hand on Leo's shoulder. "Breathe with me, Leo. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow." He tried, but the whistle in his chest was undeniable. He wasn't in critical danger yet, but he would be in an hour. "I'm going to get it," I said, standing up. "You can't," Mark said, grabbing my arm. "Preston won't let you on the property. He told the guards to shoot trespassers. We have to go to the ER. The ER is 40 minutes away and costs money you don't have," I said, pulling my arm free. "The estate is 15 minutes. Keep him upright, keep him calm. I'll be back." I grabbed my keys and walked out. I didn't run. Panic is for people who don't have a plan. The drive to the Sterling estate was a study in contrasts. I drove my rusted Ford F-150, a vehicle that sounded like a rock tumbler, through the wrought iron gates of the richest zip code in the state. I passed manicured lawns, fountains that cost more than my cabin, and driveways filled with cars that had never seen a speck of dirt. I reached the Sterling estate at 9:30 a.m. It was a sprawling monstrosity of Georgian architecture, red brick, white pillars, slate roof. To the average person, it looked like a palace, but I wasn't the average person anymore. I was the creditor. As I idled at the massive iron main gate, I looked at the property with new eyes. I saw the moss growing on the north side of the brickwork, maintenance deferred for at least 2 years. I saw the hedges were overgrown by about 3 inches, landscaping staff cut back to save money. I saw a cracked pane in one of the upper windows. Rot, I thought. The whole place is rotting from the inside out, just like the man living in it. I pressed the call button on the intercom box. It buzzed aggressively. "Service entrances around back," a bored voice crackled. "I'm not service," I said into the speaker, leaning out of my truck window. "I'm Arthur Pendleton. I'm here for my grandson's medication." There was a pause, then a click. The line went dead. I waited. I didn't honk. I just sat there, the engine of my truck vibrating the steering wheel. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, the heavy iron gates didn't open. Instead, a side pedestrian gate clicked and swung out. Preston Sterling walked out. He was wearing a silk dressing gown that was a deep royal purple, tied loosely over silk pajamas. He held a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in one hand, breakfast of champions, and a cigar in the other. He didn't look like a man on the brink of bankruptcy. He looked like a king greeting a beggar. He walked up to the driver's side window. I rolled it down. The smell of expensive cologne and stale scotch wafted into the cab. "Arthur," Preston said, a smirk dancing on his lips. "I must say, I didn't think you'd have the gas money to make it this far." "The boy needs his inhaler, Preston," I said. I didn't look at his face. I looked at the breast pocket of his robe. "You kept it. It was on the nightstand." Preston took a slow sip of his drink. "Ah, the defect's medication. You know, Arthur, in nature, the weak are usually culled by the herd. It strengthens the stock. Perhaps Mark's inability to produce viable offspring is a sign. My hands were on the steering wheel. I squeezed the leather so hard I felt the stitching pop under my thumb. "It's a 6-year-old boy," I said flatly. "Give me the inhaler." "I don't have to give you anything," Preston laughed. "You are trespassing on private property. Sterling property." "Is it?" I asked. For a split second his eyes flickered. A flash of fear? No, annoyance. He didn't know yet. "Excuse me? Is it your property?" I repeated, keeping my voice like a dull knife. "Or does the bank own it?" Preston's face hardened. He leaned in, his breath hot and sour. "Listen to me, you old grease monkey. I am Sterling Industries. I am this town, and I don't take interrogations from a man who cleans toilets for a living." He reached into the deep pocket of his robe. My heart rate spiked. For a second, I thought he might pull a gun. Instead, he pulled out the small blue plastic inhaler, Leo's lifeline. "Is this what you want?" he asked, holding it up like a treat for a dog. "Hand it over, Preston. You want it?" "Yes." "Then fetch." He drew his arm back and threw the inhaler. He didn't throw it to me. He threw it through the iron bars of the gate, aiming for a depression in the landscaping where the sprinkler system had created a muddy, stagnant pool of water. Splash! The inhaler landed directly in the muck, sinking half deep into the brown sludge. Preston laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. "Oops, slippery fingers. You know how it is, Arthur. We can't all be good with our hands like you manual laborers." I stared at the inhaler in the mud. Then I looked at Preston. "You're a small man, Preston," I said softly. "And you," he sneered, "are a trespasser. You have 10 seconds to get off my driveway before I call the police, and tell your loser son that if he comes within a mile of this house, I'll have him arrested for harassment. The Sterling family is done with leeches." I opened the truck door. "What are you doing?" Preston took a step back, clutching his drink. I ignored him. I stepped out of the truck. My work boots crunched on the gravel. I walked over to the muddy pool. I knelt down. I didn't care about the dignity. I cared about the boy. I reached into the cold, filthy water and fished out the blue plastic device. I wiped it on my flannel shirt, checking the nozzle to make sure it wasn't clogged with dirt. It looked salvageable. As I stood up, mud dripping from my hand, I looked past Preston, up at the house. On the second-floor balcony, standing behind the stone balustrade, was Vanessa. She was wearing a white cashmere sweater and holding a coffee mug. She looked immaculate, beautiful, and cold as ice. Our eyes locked. She saw her father-in-law, a man who had welcomed her into his home for Thanksgiving dinners, a man who had built her a cradle for Leo with his own hands. She saw him kneeling in the mud, humiliated by her father. She didn't wave. She didn't look shocked. She didn't mouth an apology. She simply took a sip of her coffee, turned her back, and walked back inside the mansion, closing the French doors behind her. The silence was deafening. "See?" Preston gloated, following my gaze. "She knows where the quality lies. She's scrubbing the peasant smell off her life. You should do the same." I looked at Preston one last time. I memorized the way the sunlight hit the broken capillaries in his nose. I memorized the arrogance in his stance. I memorized the exact shade of purple of his robe. I wanted to remember exactly what he looked like at the height of his delusion. "Enjoy the party, Preston," I said. "What?" he frowned. "The masquerade," I said, climbing back into my truck. "I hear it's going to be a night to remember." "It's an exclusive event," Preston sneered. "Don't worry, you're not on the list." I slammed the truck door. "Oh, I'm on the list," I thought as I put the truck in reverse. "I am the list." I backed out of the driveway, the inhaler sitting on the passenger seat, dripping mud onto the upholstery. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. The humiliation was complete. He had stripped us of our dignity. He had made me kneel. He had thrown a child's medicine in the dirt. He had given me the moral license to do absolutely anything I wanted to him. I reached for the burner phone on the seat next to me. I dialed Zurich. "Victor," I said. "Sir, initiate the bait protocol. Contact him within the hour. Tell him Orion Capital wants to meet. Is everything all right, sir? You sound—" "I'm fine," I said, watching the Sterling estate disappear in my rearview mirror. "Just get the hook ready. The fish is hungry." "And the terms?" "Tell him we're bringing a blank check," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "Tell him all his problems are about to go away." I looked at the muddy inhaler. "And Victor." "Yes?" "Add a clause to the final foreclosure document. I want the robe." The robe, sir?" "The purple one. I'm going to use it to wash my truck." I hung up and pressed the gas. Leo was waiting, and after I saved his breath, I was going to take Preston's away. I scrubbed the inhaler in the kitchen sink with hot water and dish soap. The mud from the Sterling estate swirled down the drain, dark and gritty, disappearing into the septic tank. I rinsed it until the blue plastic shone under the dim kitchen light, then shook it dry. I walked into the bedroom. Mark was pacing, his hands in his hair. Leo was still wheezing, a high-pitched whistle that cut through the silence of the cabin. "Here," I said, handing the device to Mark. He grabbed it like it was a gold bar. He shook it, primed it, and pressed it to Leo's lips. "Okay, buddy. Big breath. On 3. 1, 2, 3. Hiss." Leo inhaled. He held it, then he exhaled. We watched him for a minute. The whistle in his chest began to fade. The color returned to his cheeks. His shoulders dropped. "Thanks, Dad," Mark whispered, slumping onto the edge of the mattress. "I don't know how you got him to give it back. I thought—" "He dropped it." I lied smoothly. "I just picked it up." "You shouldn't have gone," Mark said, wiping his eyes. "If he had called the cops, we can't afford bail. We can't afford anything." "Don't worry about the money, Mark," I said, turning back toward the door. "I have a feeling our luck is about to change." I left them to rest. The adrenaline was still humming in my veins, but it wasn't the frantic energy of fear. It was the cold, precision clockwork of a plan set in motion. I walked back out to the shed. The wind had died down, leaving a heavy, silent chill in the air. I unlocked the false wall, the magnetic seal disengaging with a satisfying thud, and sat back down in the command chair. I woke the laptop. The screen cast a blue pallor over my face. I put on the headset. "Victor," I said into the encrypted line. "Ready, sir." His voice came back instantly. "He's primed," I said, staring at the financial diagnostic of Sterling Holdings on my screen. "I just saw him. He's arrogant, but he's terrified. He's drinking at 9 in the morning. That means the walls are closing in." "The liquidity report confirms it," Victor said. "He missed a payroll transfer to his household staff yesterday. He's bouncing checks to his own butler." "Good. He's starving. It's time to offer him a steak." "The script is prepped," Victor confirmed. "We are Orion Capital. We specialize in high-risk, high-reward distressed assets. We are looking for a flagship partner in the Northeast luxury market." "The number?" I asked. "We're offering a structured debt equity swap, $500 million, immediate injection. It clears his balance sheet and gives him operating capital for 5 years. He won't read the fine print," I predicted. "He'll just see the zeros. Shall I make the call?" "Do it. And patch me in. Mute only. Connecting now." A new window popped up on my screen. I listened. The phone rang 3 times. "Sterling Residence?" A harried voice answered. It wasn't a secretary, it was Preston himself. He had likely fired the secretary. "Mr. Sterling." Victor's voice was smooth, cultured, carrying a vague transatlantic accent that smelled of old Swiss banks. "My name is Victor Cross. I represent the acquisitions division of Orion Capital." "I'm busy," Preston snapped. "If you're selling insurance, I'm not interested." "We are not selling, Mr. Sterling. We are buying." There was a pause, the silence of greed waking up. "Buying what?" Preston asked, his tone shifting instantly. "Toxic assets," Victor said. "We've been monitoring the market and we believe Sterling Holdings is undervalued. We understand you are facing some temporary liquidity headwinds due to the market contraction." "Headwinds," Preston scoffed, trying to regain the upper hand. "A minor breeze. We are restructuring.
Of course, Victor soothed, but restructuring takes time and capital. Orion Capital is looking to park a significant amount of liquidity before the fiscal year ends. We are looking for a partner with legacy, heritage, a brand name. Well, the sterling name is the bedrock of this state. Exactly. My board has authorized me to extend a lifeline, a $500 million recapitalization package. It would retire all existing debts and provide a runway for future development.
I could hear Preston choke. He probably spilled his drink. 500 million? Subject to signature, of course, Victor added. We move fast, Mr. Sterling. We don't like bureaucracy. We like bold moves. We want to close this week. This week? Preston stammered. I have a very busy schedule. The annual masquerade gala is this Saturday. I have dignitaries arriving. Perfect, Victor interrupted. What better venue to announce the partnership? We can sign the papers at the gala, a public declaration of the sterling resurgence. Our chairman prefers dramatic flair. The chairman will be there? He acts through proxies mostly, Victor said, but for a deal of this magnitude, he might make an appearance. He appreciates a good party. Yes, I think we can accommodate that, Preston said, trying to sound like he was doing us a favor. I will have my legal team review the standard boilerplate, Mr. Sterling, Victor cut in, sharpening the hook. But I must warn you, the offer expires at midnight on Saturday. If the ink isn't wet by the time the clock strikes 12, the capital moves to the next candidate. We are looking at the Vanderbilt estate as a backup. The mention of his rival sealed it. No need for that, Preston said quickly. We have a deal. Send the papers. I'll see you Saturday. Excellent. Until then. The line clicked dead. I took off the headset and leaned back. I didn't smile. A smile implies happiness. This was satisfaction. It was the feeling of a math equation balancing out. He took it, I said to the empty room. I watched the screen. I had access to the back end of Preston's personal accounts, the ones linked to the debt I owned. I waited for the reaction. It took less than 5 minutes. A notification popped up. Transaction alert. Amex Black. Vendor, Imperial Event Planning. Amount, $75,000. He was doubling down. He thought the money was already in the bank. Another alert. Transaction alert. Crystal Cove Liquors. Amount, $12,000. Item, Dom Perignon, Vintage 2004. He was buying champagne to celebrate his salvation. He was spending money he didn't have, digging the hole deeper, widening the gap between his reality and his delusion. I tabbed over to the Orion Capital legal document that Victor had prepared. It was a masterpiece of legal camouflage. The first 10 pages were standard investment jargon, promise of funds, stock transfers, synergy. But page 11, paragraph 4, subsection B, the call on collateral clause. A new window popped up on my screen. I listened. The phone rang 3 times. Sterling residence? A harried voice answered. It wasn't a secretary, it was Preston himself. He had likely fired the secretary. Mr. Sterling. Victor's voice was smooth, cultured, carrying a vague transatlantic accent that smelled of old Swiss banks. My name is Victor Cross. I represent the acquisitions division of Orion Capital. I'm busy, Preston snapped. If you're selling insurance, I'm not interested. We are not selling, Mr. Sterling. We are buying. There was a pause, the silence of greed waking up. Buying what? Preston asked, his tone shifting instantly. Toxic assets, Victor said. We've been monitoring the market and we believe Sterling Holdings is undervalued. We understand you are facing some temporary liquidity headwinds due to the market contraction. Headwinds, Preston scoffed, trying to regain the upper hand. A minor breeze. We are restructuring. Of course, Victor soothed, but restructuring takes time and capital. Orion Capital is looking to park a significant amount of liquidity before the fiscal year ends. We are looking for a partner with legacy, heritage, a brand name. Well, the sterling name is the bedrock of this state. Exactly. My board has authorized me to extend a lifeline, a $500 million recapitalization package. It would retire all existing debts and provide a runway for future development.
For the next 48 hours, I scrubbed. I attacked the cabin with a ferocity that bordered on mania. I took a bristled brush to the grout in the tiny bathroom until my knuckles bled. I washed the windows with vinegar and newspaper until the grime of a decade vanished, letting the harsh winter light flood the dusty rooms. Mark watched me from the couch, Leo asleep against his side. He looked confused, maybe even a little worried that the stress finally snapped my mind. "Dad," he said, watching me dismantle the stove to clean the burners, "you don't have to do all this. The place is fine." "It's filthy," I grunted, scraping carbon off a burner ring. "If we're going to live here, we're going to live with dignity." "I can help," he offered, making a move to stand up. "Sit down," I barked. I softened my tone immediately. "Just sit. Recover. You're the guest. I'm the host. Let me work." He sank back down, looking defeated. He didn't understand. I wasn't cleaning because I cared about hygiene. I was cleaning to burn off the energy. Every scrub was a second closer to Saturday. Every wipe was a rehearsal for the clean sweep I was about to perform on the Sterling estate. I needed the distraction because the weight was killing me. Thursday afternoon, a white delivery van with no markings crunched up the gravel driveway. Mark sat up, alarmed. "Who is that? Did they find us? Is it a process server?" "Relax," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "It's tractor parts. I ordered a new carburetor for the Ford."
I walked out to meet the driver. He wasn't a delivery man. He was Stone's personal courier, a man named Miller who had a neck as thick as a tree trunk and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a generic blue uniform and carried a clipboard. "Sign here, Mr. Pendleton," Miller said, his voice professional, revealing nothing. I signed the clipboard. He handed me a large rectangular box wrapped in brown butcher paper. It was heavy. "Fragile," Miller said, a flicker of a smile crossing his face. "Handle with care." "Tell Zirk the timeline holds," I muttered. "Understood." He got back in the van and reversed down the drive. I carried the box into the cabin. "Big carburetor," Mark noted, eyeing the package. "It's a full rebuild kit," I lied smoothly. "Going to take it to the shed. Don't wait up for dinner." I walked out the back door and marched straight to the shed. I locked the door behind me, engaged the deadbolts, and placed the box on the workbench. I took a box cutter and sliced through the tape. Inside was a black garment bag with the logo of a tailor on Savile Row that didn't advertise to the public. Next to it, a small wooden box and a velvet pouch. I unzipped the bag. The tuxedo was a weapon of mass destruction, midnight blue bordering on black. The fabric was a blend of vicuña and silk that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. It had been tailored to my measurements 5 years ago for a gala in Monaco I never attended. It still smelled of cedar and potential. I touched the lapel. It was sharp enough to cut glass. Next, I opened the wooden box. Inside sat a Patek Philippe Ref 1518, perpetual calendar, rose gold. It was a watch that said you didn't just have money, it said you had history. It said you owned time rather than chasing it. I strapped it to my wrist. The weight was familiar. It felt like putting on a piece of armor. Finally, the velvet pouch. I pulled the drawstrings and slid the mask out. It was a Volto, a full-face Venetian mask. But it wasn't the gaudy, glitter-covered plastic you see at tourist shops. It was porcelain, matte white with severe, angular features. The lips were painted a thin, cruel black. Gold leaf traced the contours of the eyes, not in a decorative swirl, but in sharp, geometric lines that looked like circuitry or scars. It was a mask that offered no expression. It was a blank slate, a mirror for the viewer's own fears. I held it up to the dusty light of the shed. "Hello, old friend," I whispered. I didn't put it on, not yet. I carefully repacked the items. I couldn't leave them in the shed. The humidity would ruin the silk. I carried the box back to the cabin. Mark was in the bathroom giving Leo a bath. I seized the opportunity. I went to the corner of the main room, under the rug where the floorboards were loose. I had pried them up years ago to check for termites and never nailed them back down properly. I lifted the rug, pried up the boards, and slid the flat box into the crawl space between the joists. I stomped the boards back down and pulled the rug over the spot. I was just straightening up when Mark walked out, drying his hands on a towel. "Dad?" "Just fixing a loose nail," I said, stomping on the rug for effect. "Damn thing keeps snagging my socks." Mark didn't question it. He walked over to the kitchen table and sat down. He had pulled something out of the trash bag, the only thing he had saved besides clothes. A photo album. It was a small, leather-bound book, wedding photos. I stopped what I was doing and watched him. Mark turned the pages slowly. I could see the glossy reflections. Mark in a rented tux, smiling like he had won the lottery. Vanessa in a Vera Wang gown that probably cost more than my truck, looking radiant. That was the tragedy of it. In the photos, she looked like she loved him. She looked happy, Mark whispered, his voice thick. Look at her, Dad. She's smiling. I walked over and looked over his shoulder. The photo showed them cutting the cake. Preston was in the background, looking bored, checking his watch. But Vanessa was laughing, feeding Mark a piece of cake. She was acting, Mark, I said gently. No, Mark shook his head, a tear dropping onto the plastic sleeve of the page. It was real. I know it was. We were happy. Before the money got tight. Before Preston started whispering in her ear every day that she could do better. People change when the pressure hits, I said. Pressure reveals the cracks. I don't understand how she could turn it off, Mark sobbed, finally breaking down. He put his hands in his head. How do you just turn off love? How do you look at your husband and your son and see liabilities?
I looked at my son. He was broken. He was mourning a woman who was currently sipping champagne and planning her wedding to another man, less than 72 hours after kicking him out. The contrast made my blood boil. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of a bar fight. It was the cold, pressurized anger of a boiler about to burst. I walked away from him, into the kitchen shadows. I pulled out my burner phone. I opened the surveillance app connected to the Orion Capital transfer protocols. I had access to the transaction logs. 14 p.m. Preston Sterling. Vendor, Ice Artistry Inc. Item, 12-foot swan sculpture, vodka ludge. Cost, $4,500. 15:30 p.m. Vanessa Sterling. Vendor, Saks Fifth Avenue, Private Client Services. Item, gown, emerald silk. Cost, $12,000. I looked back at Mark, shivering in his t-shirt, crying over a picture of a woman who had just spent $12,000 on a dress to impress her new buyer. She wasn't mourning, she was shopping. She wasn't thinking about Mark, she was thinking about silk. I gripped the edge of the counter. The wood groaned. Let it out, Mark, I said, my voice low. Cry it all out tonight. Mark looked up, eyes red and swollen. Why? Because, I said, staring at the floorboards where the mask was waiting, by Saturday, you're going to be done crying. You're going to be angry. I'm not an angry person, Dad, he sniffled. I'm not like you. I smiled grimly. You're a Pendleton, I said. It's in the blood. You just need the right trigger. I looked at the phone screen again. A new alert. 5 p.m. Preston Sterling. Vendor, Elite Security Services. Note, extra detail for Saturday. Keep the riffraff out. He was hiring guards to keep us away. He was using the money he thought he was getting from me to pay guards to protect him from me. The irony was delicious. Get some sleep, Mark, I said. I have a few more things to clean. Mark closed the album. You're right. I need to be strong for Leo. Stronger than you know, I promised. He went to the back room. I stayed in the dark, listening to the wind, feeling the presence of the tuxedo under the floorboards like a heartbeat. The stage was set. The costumes were ready. The villain was spending his budget. All that was left was the performance.
Friday, 10 a.m., the day before the execution. I sat in the shed, the air scrubbers humming silently. On the desk, the Panasonic Toughbook was displaying a live audio waveform. Next to it, a GPS tracker showed a single green dot moving up the winding driveway of the Sterling estate. The dot was Marcus Stone, my personal attorney, and the shark I kept in a tank for special occasions. He was driving a rented Mercedes S-Class, wearing a $5,000 suit, and carrying a briefcase that contained the rope for Preston's hanging. I tapped the headset. Comms check. Loud and clear, Arthur. Stone's voice came through, crisp and professional via the hidden microphone in his lapel. Approaching the main entrance. The gate is open. They're expecting me. Remember the script, I said, leaning into the microphone. You are the wall. He is the ball. Let him bounce off you until he tires himself out. Understood. I watched the screen as the green dot stopped at the front door. I heard the heavy thud of the car door closing, the crunch of gravel, and then the chime of the doorbell. A moment later,
The door opened. "Mr. Stone," a butler's voice. "Mr. Sterling is expecting you in the library." I closed my eyes, visualizing the path. The library was on the ground floor, east wing. Mahogany shelves, leather chairs, a pig-friendly fireplace. It was where Preston liked to intimidate people. Right this way.
I heard footsteps echoing on marble, then the heavy creak of double doors opening. "Mr. Stone!" Preston's voice boomed. It was too loud, too eager. "Welcome, welcome! Please, come in. Can I get you a drink? Scotch? Brandy?" "It is 10 in the morning, Mr. Sterling," Stone said. His voice was ice water. "I am on the clock." Right. Business first. I like that." I heard the rustle of fabric as they sat down. "This is my daughter, Vanessa," Preston said. "She will be joining us. She is instrumental to the future of the estate." "Ms. Sterling," Stone acknowledged. "Mr. Stone," Vanessa said. Her voice was tight, anxious. "We were told the transfer would happen today. We have vendors waiting for deposits." "The transfer is approved," Stone said, opening his briefcase. The click of the latches was loud in the silence. "However, the chairman is particular." "Particular?" Preston asked. "The man is buying my debt. He can be as particular as he wants. Who is he? I've looked for Orion Capital's board members, but you're very private." "We value discretion above all else." Stone recited the line we had practiced. "The chairman is an eccentric man. He does not do boardrooms. He does not do Zoom calls. He believes that you only truly know a man when you see how he celebrates." "Celebrates?" Preston asked. "He will be attending your gala tomorrow night." "He's coming?" Preston sounded delighted. "Fantastic. We'll have a VIP table set up, front row. I can introduce him to the Viscount." "No," Stone cut him off. "He will be incognito. He will be wearing a mask like the other guests. He wishes to observe the culture of the Sterling family before he signs the final check." "A secret test," Preston chuckled. "I love it. Very theatrical. He'll find our culture is impeccable. We are the definition of class." I snorted in the shed. "Class. That brings me to the condition of the deal," Stone said. I heard paper sliding across the table. "What is this?" Preston asked. "An affidavit of solvency and non-reliance," Stone explained. "Orion Capital is taking on a significant risk. We need to ensure that the Sterling revenue stream is not being siphoned off by dead weight." The room went silent. "Dead weight?" Vanessa asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Dependents," Stone clarified brutally. "Former spouses, children who do not contribute to the legacy, sick relatives, leeches. The chairman has a strict policy. He invests in producers, not parasites. If there are any ongoing financial obligations to non-essential family members, alimony, child support, housing allowances, the deal is void." I held my breath. This was the pivot point. If Preston had a shred of humanity, he would hesitate. He would say, "Well, I have a grandson who needs support." He would say, "I have a son-in-law who I just kicked out. I should probably ensure they don't starve." "Is that all?" Preston laughed. It was a sound of pure relief. "I thought it was something serious." "It is serious, Mr. Sterling. This is a legal document. By signing it, you are swearing under penalty of fraud that you have permanently severed all financial and emotional ties with anyone who drains the estate's resources." "Give me the pen," Preston demanded. "Father," Vanessa murmured. "Does that mean Mark and Leo?" "Vanessa, darling." Preston's voice dropped to a sinister whisper, but the microphone picked it up perfectly. "They are gone. They are the past. The Viscount is the future. Do you want to be a Viscountess, or do you want to be the wife of a homeless man?" There was a pause. "Sign it," Vanessa whispered. My stomach turned. She didn't just allow it, she encouraged it. "Here," Preston said. I heard the scratching of a fountain pen on high-quality paper. "I, Preston Sterling, hereby confirm that the Sterling estate has 0 non-essential dependents. I have personally cleaned house. The mud has been washed away." "Excellent," Stone said. "And you, Miss Sterling, as a beneficiary, we need your countersign." "Of course." Scratch, scratch. She signed her son away for a dress and a title. "The document is executed," Stone said, the sound of the paper being slid back into the briefcase echoing like a gunshot. "The chairman will be pleased to see you have prioritized the asset." "So the check?" Preston asked greedily. "Tomorrow night, midnight, at the unmasking. The chairman will approach you personally. He will have the check in one hand, and he will expect this affidavit to be true." "It's true," Preston bragged. "I kicked them to the curb myself. They have nothing. They are nothing." "Then you have nothing to worry about," Stone said. "I will see you at the ball. Good day, Mr. Stone. Please, take a canapé on your way out." I heard Stone walking away. The heavy doors closed. The audio feed cut to the exterior wind as Stone walked back to the car. "Did you get it?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. "I have it," Stone replied, climbing into the Mercedes. "Signed, witnessed, and notarized. It's a confession, Arthur. He just legally admitted to abandoning a minor to secure a loan. In family court, this would destroy him. In the court of public opinion, it's a nuclear bomb. Bring it to me," I said. "And Stone?" "Yes? Get the car ready for tomorrow. The Phantom. The Rolls is already polished and waiting in the storage unit. Good, because tomorrow night, the eccentric chairman is going to teach Preston Sterling a lesson about value." I took off the headset and stared at the wall of tools. They had signed it. They had officially, legally, and eagerly erased us. I stood up and walked over to the false wall. I pushed it closed. I went back to the cabin. Mark was sitting on the floor, building a castle out of playing cards with Leo. They were laughing. It was a fragile, quiet sound. I looked at them. The dead weight. The mud. I walked over and sat down next to Leo. "What you building, kid?" I asked. "A castle," Leo said, placing a jack of diamonds on top. "For my bear. It's a good castle," I said, stroking his hair. "But tomorrow, I'm going to get you a real one." Mark looked at me. "Dad, you okay? You look intense." "I'm fine, Mark," I said, picking up the ace of spades. "Just ready for the game to end." I placed the ace at the base of the card tower. "Tomorrow," I whispered, "we bring the house down." Saturday, 8 p.m. The air in the cabin was thick enough to choke on. It was a suffocating blend of wood smoke, dust, and pure, unadulterated depression. Mark was slumped on the sagging plaid couch, illuminated only by the blue light of his cracked smartphone screen. He hadn't showered. He was wearing the same gray sweatpants he'd worn for 3 days and a hoodie that had a stain on the collar. He was scrolling. I knew exactly what he was looking at. Instagram. The hashtag Sterling Masquerade hashtag. He was watching the live feed of the life that had just been stolen from him. He was watching the limousines pull up to the estate where he had lived for 5 years. He was watching his wife, pose for the paparazzi in an emerald green gown that shimmered like money, hanging on the arm of a man he had never met. "She looks beautiful," Mark whispered, the self-loathing dripping from his voice. "Look at her, Dad. She doesn't even look sad. She's glowing." I was standing in the doorway of the small bedroom, hidden in the shadows. I didn't answer. "Leo asked for her before he fell asleep," Mark continued, talking to the empty room. "He asked if Mommy was coming to tuck him in. I had to tell him she was working. I had to lie to him again." He dropped the phone on the cushion next to him and put his head in his hands. "I'm a failure. I'm 30 years old, sleeping on my dad's couch while my wife sells herself to a viscount. I should just sign the papers, give her what she wants. Maybe she'll let me see Leo on weekends if I disappear." That was the breaking point. I stepped back into the bedroom and closed the door softly. He was done. The Mark I knew, the soft, gentle man who tried to please everyone, had hit rock bottom. Good. You can't build a skyscraper until you dig down to the bedrock. I turned to the bed. Laid out on the quilt was the harvest of my preparation. I stripped off the flannel shirt that smelled of engine grease. I kicked off the heavy work boots that were caked in mud. I peeled off the stained jeans. I stood there in the cold room, an old man with scars on his back and iron in his spine. I reached for the shirt. Egyptian cotton, crisp white with a piqué bib. I slipped it on. The studs were mother of pearl. I fastened them with steady hands. Next, the trousers, midnight blue wool with a satin stripe down the leg. They fit perfectly, draping without a wrinkle. Then the jacket, peak lapel, single button. The weight of the fabric was reassuring. It felt like armor. I checked myself in the cracked mirror on the back of the door. The janitor was gone. Arthur Pendleton, the man who scrubbed toilets and fixed leaky faucets, had vanished. Staring back at me was the chairman of Orion Capital, the predator. I reached for the box on the nightstand. I took out the Patek Philippe 1518. I fastened the leather strap around my wrist. I wound it once, twice, feeling the mechanical heartbeat of the watch sync with my own. Finally, the mask. I picked up the white Venetian Volto. I didn't put it on yet. I slid it into the interior pocket of the tuxedo jacket. I picked up the second garment bag, the one I had prepared for Mark. I took a deep breath. It was showtime. I opened the bedroom door. Mark didn't look up. He was staring at his hands, lost in his misery.
"Get up," I said. My voice was different. It wasn't the gravelly mumble I used to blend in. It was a command, a sound that expected obedience. Mark flinched. He turned his head slowly. When his eyes landed on me, he froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He blinked, once, twice, as if trying to clear a hallucination. "Dad?" he whispered. I didn't smile. I walked into the room, the hard soles of my dress shoes clicking sharply on the wooden floorboards. I looked like I had just walked out of a Bond film, standing in a room with peeling wallpaper. "I said, get up," I repeated. "What are you—" Mark scrambled to sit up, his eyes scanning the tuxedo, the cufflinks, the watch. "Where did you get that? Did you rent that? Dad, that looks expensive. We don't have money for costumes." I threw the garment bag at him. It hit him in the chest with a heavy thud. "Put it on," I ordered. Mark fumbled with the bag. "What is this?" "It's a suit, Mark. A bespoke Brioni. I had it tailored for you 3 years ago, kept it in storage. It should still fit if you haven't let yourself go completely." "Brioni?" Mark looked at me like I was speaking Greek. "Dad, a Brioni costs like $7,000. You're a janitor. You live on a pension. I don't understand." "You don't need to understand," I said, walking to the front door. "We're leaving in 10 minutes." "Leaving? Leaving for where?" Mark stood up, the bag sliding to the floor. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm not playing dress up while my life falls apart."
I stopped. I turned slowly. "Your life isn't falling apart," I said cold. "Your life is being stolen, and you are sitting here watching it happen on a 5-inch screen." "What can I do?" Mark shouted, tears springing back to his eyes. "He has security. He has lawyers. He has millions of dollars. I have a trash bag of clothes and a broken heart. I can't fight him." "No," I said softly. "You can't. Not like this." I pointed to the garment bag. "But we can." "Who is we?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. "You're my dad. You fix sinks." I walked over to him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a key fob. It wasn't the jagged metal key to the Ford F-150. It was a heavy black fob with the silver RR logo inlaid in crystal. "Mrs. Higgins from down the road is in the kitchen. She's watching Leo. He's safe." I tossed the keys to Mark. He caught them by reflex. He looked down at the logo. His eyes went wide. "Dad, what is this?" "Go outside," I said. Mark hesitated. He looked at the keys, then at me, then at the door. Curiosity, and a spark of something else, maybe hope, finally moved his feet. He walked to the door and opened it. I followed him out onto the porch. The moon was full, casting a silver light over the overgrown yard. The Ford truck was parked off to the side, looking like a rusted heap. But in the center of the driveway, idling silently, was a monster. A Rolls-Royce Phantom, pitch black. The paint was so deep it looked like a hole in the universe. The chrome grille gleamed like the teeth of a shark. The Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament was illuminated from below, glowing like an angel leading the way into hell. My driver, a man I hired through Stone named Echo, was standing by the rear door, dressed in full livery. He blended into the shadows. Mark stumbled down the porch steps. He walked toward the car like he was approaching a UFO. He reached out and touched the fender. It's real," he whispered. Did you steal this?" "I don't steal, Mark," I said from the porch. "I acquire." Mark turned around. The moonlight hit his face. He looked terrified. He looked confused, but for the first time in days, he didn't look defeated. "Who are you?" he asked. The question hung in the cold air. I walked down the steps. I didn't answer him. I didn't give him the backstory of the software patents sold in the 90s, or the hedge fund I built in the shadows, or the empire of debt I managed from a shed. That story was for another time. Tonight was about action. "The suit, Mark," I said, checking my Patek. "We're on a schedule. The unmasking is at midnight." "We're going to the gala?" Mark's voice rose an octave. "Dad, Preston will have us arrested at the gate. He has a list." I walked past him and opened the rear door of the Phantom. The interior was cream leather and lamb's wool. It smelled of power. "Preston has a list," I agreed, looking back at my son. "But tonight, we're not on the guest list." I smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. "We're the owners of the venue." Mark stared at me. He looked at the car. He looked at the keys in his hand. "Go change," I said. "Shave. Fix your hair. You are a Pendleton. Tonight, you remind them what that means." Mark stood there for one more second. Then something clicked. He looked at the Sterling Tower in the distance, then back at the Rolls-Royce. He clenched his fist around the keys, then handed them back to me. "I'll be 5 minutes," he said. He turned and ran back into the cabin. I stood by the car, listening to the idle of the V12 engine. It was a low, steady thrum, like the purring of a large cat before it pounces. Echo nodded to me. "Good evening, sir." "Good evening, Echo," I said, sliding into the driver's seat. "I'll drive tonight." "As you wish, sir." 5 minutes later, the door to the cabin opened again. Mark stepped out. The transformation was complete. The Brioni suit fit him like a second skin, broadening his shoulders, tapering at the waist. He had shaved the stubble. He had combed his hair back. He stood tall. He didn't look like the man who had been shivering on a park bench. He looked like a prince who had just remembered he owned the castle. He walked down the steps and got into the passenger seat. He looked at the dashboard, at the complex array of dials and the starry night headliner above us. "Dad," he said, his voice steady now, "what is happening?" I put the car in gear. The spirit of ecstasy lit up brighter on the hood. "You wanted justice, Mark," I said, pulling the Phantom onto the dirt road, the suspension absorbing the bump so completely it felt like we were floating. "I did," he admitted. "Justice is expensive," I said, pressing the accelerator. The massive car surged forward, power effortless and endless. Luckily, I've been saving up. We hit the paved road. I turned toward the city lights that glowed on the horizon. "Where are we going?" Mark asked, though he already knew. I glanced at him. The hunger was back in his eyes. "Tonight," I said, gripping the leather wheel, "we go to the bank." The driveway to the Sterling estate was a river of red taillights. Mercedes, Bentleys, a few Ferraris, the parade of the local gentry arriving to kiss the ring of a man who was technically destitute. I bypassed the line. I swung the Rolls-Royce Phantom into the oncoming lane, the massive V12 engine surging with a whisper of power. A valet in a red vest stepped out to wave us down, looking indignant, but when the headlights of the Phantom hit him, illuminating the spirit of ecstasy on the hood, he froze. You don't wave down a Phantom. You get out of its way. I pulled up to the portico, right behind a stretch Hummer that looked tacky by comparison. "Masks," I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the white Venetian Volto. The porcelain was cool against my skin. I tied the silk ribbons behind my head. I looked in the rearview mirror. Arthur Pendleton was gone. There was only the blank, unblinking stare of the chairman. Beside me, Mark put on the mask I had given him, a matte black bauta, covering the upper face and nose, leaving his jaw exposed. It made him look dangerous. A shadow. "Ready?" I asked. Mark took a deep breath. His hands were gripping his knees. "I feel like I'm going to throw up." "Swallow it," I said. "Use it." I opened the door.
The air was filled with the sound of a string quartet playing something by Mozart, layered over the chatter of 300 people pretending to like each other. We stepped out. The flashbulbs popped immediately. The local paparazzi were hungry for the Orion investor, though they didn't know who he was. They just saw a phantom and two men in five-figure suits. I tossed the keys to the valet. I didn't look at him. Keep it close. We won't be staying long. We walked up the grand staircase to the main entrance. Two security guards, men I recognized as the ones who had physically escorted Mark off the property 3 days ago, stepped forward. They wore earpieces and ill-fitting suits. Invitation? The larger one grunted, holding up a hand. I didn't stop walking. I didn't speak. I simply reached into the breast pocket of my tuxedo and produced a card. It wasn't paper. It was a slab of anodized titanium, laser-etched with a single word, Orion. I held it up. The light from the chandelier caught the metal. The guard looked at the card, then at my mask, then at the list on his clipboard. He tapped his earpiece. "Control, we have a priority guest, Orion credential." He listened for a split second. His face went pale. The voice on the other end, likely Stone, who had already infiltrated the control room, or perhaps the head of the security firm who knew exactly who paid the bills, must have put the fear of God into him. "Apologies, sir," the guard stammered, stepping aside and unhooking the velvet rope. "Right this way. The VIP section is the raised platform in the ballroom."
I walked past him. As Mark passed, he stopped. He turned his masked head toward the guard. "Problem, sir?" the guard asked, nervous. Mark stared at him. This was the man who had thrown Leo's teddy bear into a puddle. I saw Mark's fist clench at his side. The urge to strike was vibrant, buzzing in the air between them. "Mark," I said. My voice was low, distorted slightly by the mask. "Walk." Mark exhaled sharply through his nose and followed me inside. The ballroom was a spectacle of excess. Preston had spared no expense. My expense. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceiling. Tables were laden with ice sculptures, caviar towers, and fountains flowing with what I assumed was chocolate, but hoped was despair. The room was a sea of masks, feathers, sequins, gold leaf. The elite of the state were hiding in plain sight, drinking champagne and gossiping about who was sleeping with whom and who was going broke. "They're all here," we whispered, scanning the room. The mayor, the bank manager who denied my loan application last year, even the pastor. Wolves travel in packs, I noted. We moved through the crowd like sharks cutting through a school of fish. The crowd parted for us. There was something about the way we moved, silent, purposeful, detached, that made people step back. The white mask and the black mask, the ghost and the shadow. "There," I said. I nodded toward the far end of the room. A raised platform had been set up, separated from the rabble by a gold velvet rope. On it sat a series of plush couches. Preston Sterling was holding court. He was wearing a gold mask that matched his ego, shaped like a lion's face. He held a champagne flute in one hand and was gesturing wildly with the other. He was laughing, a loud, booming sound that grated on my ears. Next to him sat Vanessa. She was stunning. The emerald dress clung to her like liquid money. She wore a delicate, jeweled mask that barely covered her eyes. She wasn't looking at the party. She was scanning the room, her eyes darting to every man who walked in, assessing his worth. She was hunting. "Let's go say hello," I said. We walked up the steps to the VIP section. A waiter tried to intercept us with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. I walked right past him. We stopped 10 feet from Preston's circle. We were close enough to hear every word, but the noise of the party created a sonic bubble around us. They didn't notice us yet. Preston was regaling a group of sycophants, a local developer and his wife. "Had to be done, Jerry," Preston shouted over the music. "You prune a rosebush to get the best blooms, right? Same with a family tree. You cut the dead wood." "But wasn't your son-in-law, didn't they have a child?" the developer's wife asked, clutching her pearls. "A mistake," Preston waved his hand dismissively. "Vanessa was young, foolish. She married well, let's just say the bloodline wasn't compatible.
The boy was sickly, always wheezing. It was dragging down the sterling image. Who wants a sickly heir? Mark made a sound in his throat, a growl. And where are they now? The developer asked. Gone, Preston laughed, clinking his glass against Vanessa's. Sent them packing, told them to find a shelter. Honestly, it's better for them. They'll learn grit. I did them a favor. Vanessa took a sip of her wine. She looked bored. It's true, she said, her voice carrying that practiced, airy tone of the upper crust. Mark was sweet in a puppy dog sort of way, but he had no ambition. He was happy being average. And the boy? Honestly, it was exhausting. Preston is right. We need a fresh start. The Viscount, Henri, he has vitality. To vitality, Preston toasted. To the Viscount, the group echoed. Mark's body was vibrating. I could feel the heat radiating off him. He was watching the woman he had loved for 7 years, the mother of his child, dismiss their son as exhausting and their marriage as a puppy dog phase. He took a step forward. I reached out and clamped my hand on his shoulder. My grip was iron. Not yet, I hissed into his ear. Did you hear her? Mark whispered, his voice thick with tears and rage. She said Leo was a mistake. She said, I heard, I said. Burn it into your memory. Let it fuel you. I want to kill him, Mark said. I want to rip that mask off and smash his face in. Violence is the tool of the incompetent, I quoted. We have a better weapon. What? The truth. At that moment, Preston looked up. He saw the white mask. He saw the tuxedo. He saw the stillness. He froze. The laughter died in his throat. He stood up, swaying slightly. He squinted at me. You, Preston pointed a finger. I was told, are you him, the chairman? The circle of sycophants went quiet. Vanessa looked up, her eyes widening as she took in the phantom-driving stranger. I didn't speak. I simply nodded once, slow, imperious. Preston's face broke into a grin that was pure greed. He pushed past the developer. My dear sir, Preston gushed, opening his arms. Welcome, welcome to Sterling Manor. I am Preston Sterling. This is my daughter, Vanessa. We are so honored.
He extended his hand. I looked at his hand. Then I looked at his face. I didn't take it. Preston's hand hovered in the air, awkward, rejected. He pulled it back, clearing his throat nervously. Yes, Stone said you were eccentric. No matter, please, join us. We have the best view of the room. He gestured to the empty spots on the couch next to Vanessa. We are waiting for the midnight hour, I said. My voice was deep, cold, and unrecognizable. Of course, of course. Preston nodded rapidly. The signing, the big reveal. I have the papers right here. He patted his breast pocket. And I assure you, everything is in order. The house cleaning we discussed? Done. Permanently. He winked at me behind his lion mask, a conspiratorial wink between two powerful men who understood that people were disposable. I looked at Vanessa. She was staring at Mark. Mark was standing slightly behind me, the black mask obscuring his features, but his posture, rigid, hands clenched, was familiar. She frowned slightly. She tilted her head. Do we know your associate? Vanessa asked, pointing her champagne flute at Mark. Mark turned his head to look directly at her. He is my auditor, I said smoothly. He is here to count the cost. The cost? Vanessa laughed nervously. But the deal is fixed, isn't it? 500 million? There are always hidden costs, Miss Sterling, I said. Always. Well, Preston interrupted, sensing the tension. Let's get you a drink. Champagne? Or perhaps something stronger. We have a 50-year-old Scotch in the study.
Water, I said. Water? Preston blinked. Ice water. Right away. He snapped his fingers at a waiter. Water for the chairman, and bring a bottle for the auditor. I checked my Patek Philippe. 11:45 p.m. 15 minutes. Please, Preston said, gesturing to the crowd below. Enjoy the party. It's all for you, after all. A celebration of the new partnership. I looked out over the sea of masks.
"It is certainly a night for revelations," I said. I sat down on the velvet couch, taking the center spot. I crossed my legs. Mark remained standing behind me, like a bodyguard, his eyes never leaving Vanessa's face. She shifted uncomfortably, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She looked at Mark again, a flicker of recognition, or maybe just guilt dancing in her eyes, but she pushed it down. She took a large gulp of wine. Preston leaned in close to me. "So," he whispered, booze on his breath, "between us, captains of industry, what made you choose Sterling? Was it the brand? The location?" I turned my white, expressionless mask toward him. "It was the potential," I said. "Potential for growth?" he asked eagerly. "Potential for justice," I said. Preston laughed, slapping his knee. "Justice, I love it. That's a good one. Ruthless. I can see why you're the boss." He had no idea. I sat there, the silent statue, counting the seconds. Every tick of the watch was a hammer blow on the coffin nail I was about to drive home. The music swelled, the crowd danced, and the clock ticked toward midnight. The minute hand on the Patek Philippe 1518 swept past the 11:59 p.m. The atmosphere in the ballroom shifted. It was a subtle change, like the drop in barometric pressure before a tornado touches down. The waiters stopped circulating. The laughter, which had been a dull roar for hours, began to taper off into hushed whispers. The guests knew the rhythm of these events. Midnight was the witching hour. Midnight was when the secrets were spilled. Preston Sterling stood up. He adjusted his gold lion mask, smoothing the lapels of his tuxedo. He looked down at me, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of avarice and triumph. "It's time," he whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. "Are you ready to make history, Mr. Chairman?" I looked up at him through the slits of my white porcelain mask. I didn't nod, I didn't speak. I simply stood up. My movement was the signal. Mark, standing behind the couch like a sentinel shadow, stepped back to give me room. I could hear his breathing, short, sharp intakes of air. He was a wire pulled so tight it was humming. Preston turned to the bandleader on the lower stage and made a cutting motion across his throat. The string quartet stopped mid-measure. The sudden silence was jarring. It sucked the air out of the room. 300 heads turned toward the VIP platform. Preston walked to the edge of the balcony, grabbing a wireless microphone from a stand. He tapped it twice. Thump, thump. The sound echoed through the cavernous ballroom, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and the marble floors. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston bellowed. His voice was projected through the massive speakers, booming with the confidence that only ignorance can provide. "Distinguished guests, creditors, rivals." A ripple of polite laughter moved through the crowd. "Thank you for joining us tonight at the Sterling Estate," Preston continued, pacing the stage like a televangelist. "I know there have been rumors, oh yes, I hear them, people whispering that the Sterling legacy is fading, that the sun is setting on this house." He paused for dramatic effect. He looked out over the sea of masks. "They say we are overextended," Preston sneered. "They say we are outdated." He pointed a finger at the crowd. "But tonight I am here to tell you that the rumors of my demise have been greatly exaggerated." Applause. Scattered but growing, the sycophants were doing their job. In business, as in nature, survival is not about size. It is about purity. It is about evolution. Sometimes a tree must shed its dead branches so the trunk can grow taller. I saw Mark flinch in my peripheral vision. Dead branches. "I have made difficult choices this week," Preston said, his voice dropping to a somber theatrical register. "I have had to look at my own life, my own family, and ask who is contributing to the legacy and who is dragging it down into the mud." He looked back at Vanessa, who was beaming, striking a pose that showed off the diamonds on her neck, diamonds bought on credit. "My daughter Vanessa understands this," Preston said. "She has chosen duty over sentiment. She has chosen the future over the past. She is a true Sterling." Vanessa blew a kiss to the crowd. The crowd clapped. It was a grotesque display of narcissism.
"And because we have cleaned our house," Preston shouted, his voice rising to a crescendo, "because we have exorcised the weak links, we have attracted the attention of the gods." He turned toward me. The spotlight swung around, blindingly bright. It hit me squarely in the chest, reflecting off the white porcelain of my mask. I didn't blink. I didn't shield my eyes. I stood perfectly still, a void in the light. "Tonight, I am proud to announce a historic partnership," Preston yelled. "A merger that will make Sterling Industries the most powerful entity on the East Coast. A cash injection of $500 million. A collective gasp went through the room. 500 million. It was an unfathomable amount of money to most people. To the bankers in the room, it was a miracle. "Please welcome," Preston gestured with a sweeping arm, "the chairman of Orion Capital, the man who knows true value comes from pure stock."
The applause was thunderous. They were clapping for the money. They were clapping for the mystery. Preston beckoned me. Come up, sir. Step into the light." I began to walk. My steps were slow, deliberate. I could feel the weight of the Patek Philippe on my wrist. I could feel the folded affidavit in the pocket of Mark's jacket behind me. I could feel the rage of a father who had watched his son shivering on a bench. I walked up the 3 steps to the center of the platform. The spotlight followed me. To the crowd, I was an enigma, a faceless billionaire, a savior. I stopped next to Preston. He looked small next to me. Even in his elevated shoes, he lacked the stature of a man who was worked for his life. He smelled of sweat and expensive gin. "They love you," Preston whispered to me, off mic. "We've got them. We've won." He turned back to the crowd. "The chairman is a man of few words," Preston announced. "He prefers to let his money speak. And tonight, that money is going to shout." He turned to me, his eyes wide behind the lion mask. He extended his hand. "The check, sir," Preston said, his voice trembling with greed. "Let us seal the bond. Let us show them that the Sterling bloodline is invincible." He held his hand out, palm open, waiting for the envelope that contained his salvation. He waited for the handshake that would validate his cruelty. "Welcome, partner," he said, grinning. The room went silent. The music was gone. The whispers were gone. There was only the hum of the spotlight and the heavy, suffocating expectation of the transaction. I looked at his hand. It was soft, uncalloused, a hand that had never held a shovel, never fixed a tire, never carried a sleeping child through the cold. I reached into the inner pocket of my tuxedo jacket. Preston's eyes followed my hand. He licked his lips. I didn't pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a single folded piece of paper. The paper he had signed yesterday. The confession. I didn't hand it to him. I held it in my left hand. With my right hand, I reached up to my face. The crowd leaned in. The mystery was about to be revealed. Preston frowned. "Sir, the check?" I found the silk ribbon behind my head. I pulled it. The knot came undone. The white porcelain mask came loose. I lowered it slowly. The spotlight hit my face, my real face, the face of Arthur Pendleton, the face with the deep lines etched by grief and hard labor, the face of the janitor he had mocked at the gate, the face of the grandson whose grandson's inhaler he had thrown in the mud. I stared directly into Preston's eyes. For a second, there was no recognition. He was expecting a stranger. He was expecting a European tycoon or a Wall Street shark. He couldn't process the face of the peasant in the tuxedo. Then his pupils dilated. His mouth opened slightly. The color drained from his face, turning him a sickly shade of gray beneath the gold mask. "Arthur?" he whispered. It was a sound of pure confusion. The janitor?" I leaned into the microphone. My voice didn't boom like his. It was quiet, cold. It sounded like the cocking of a gun. "I do have the paperwork, Preston," I said. The feedback from the speakers whined slightly. The
The crowd was confused. They were whispering, "Who is that? Is that the gardener?" "But you didn't read the fine print," I continued, holding up the paper. I took a step closer to him. He took a step back, stumbling slightly. You're not," Preston stammered, his hand dropping to his side. "Where is the chairman? Where is the money?" I dropped the mask on the floor. It shattered. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent ballroom. "There is no chairman," I said, my voice echoing through the hall. I pointed at myself. "There is only the creditor."
The silence that followed the shattering of my porcelain mask was absolute. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the presence of a vacuum. It felt as if 300 people had simultaneously forgotten how to breathe. Preston stared at me. His eyes were darting back and forth between my face and the tuxedo, trying to reconcile the two impossibilities standing before him. He knew Arthur Pendleton, the man with grease under his fingernails who drove a truck that smelled of wet dog. He did not know this man, this statue in midnight blue wool who stood under the spotlight with the posture of a monarch. "Arthur?" Preston repeated, his voice barely a squeak against the hum of the speakers. Is this a joke? How did you get in here? Security!" He looked around frantically for the guards. He waved his hand toward the edge of the stage. "Get him off! It's the janitor! He's crazy!" The guards didn't move. They were standing at the perimeter, arms crossed, staring straight ahead. They worked for Stone now. They worked for the man who signed the checks, and as of this morning, that man was me. "No one is coming, Preston," I said into the microphone. My voice was amplified, crisp, and terrifyingly calm. It reached every corner of the ballroom. "You," Preston pointed a shaking finger at me. "You're ruining the ceremony. I have a deal to sign. Where is the chairman?" I stepped closer to him. I was close enough to see the sweat breaking out on his forehead beneath the gold lion mask. "You still don't see it, Preston. You look at the world through a keyhole, Preston. You see what people wear. You see what they drive. You never bother to look at what they own."
I raised the document in my hand, the affidavit he had signed yesterday, stapled to a thick sheaf of legal papers. "You wanted the chairman of Herein Capital," I announced to the room. "You wanted the man who bought your debt. You wanted the man who holds the mortgage on this house, the lien on your tower, and the title to every car in your driveway." I paused. I let the words hang there. I am the chairman. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. It started near the front and rolled back like a wave. "Liar!" Preston screamed. He lunged forward, grabbing my lapel. "You're a broke mechanic. You live in a shack. You can't even afford heat." I didn't shove him. I didn't hit him. I simply grabbed his wrist, my grip honed by 40 years of wrenching frozen bolts, and removed his hand from my suit. I twisted it slightly, forcing him to his knees. "I live in a shack because I choose to," I said, looking down at him. "I live simply because I don't need a gold mask to know who I am. But make no mistake, Preston, I bought your loans 3 years ago. I bought them because I knew this day would come. I knew you would eventually hang yourself with your own greed." I let go of his wrist. He scrambled back, panting, looking up at me with terror dawning in his eyes. "And yesterday," I continued, holding up the paper, "I got the reason to pull the trigger." I turned to the crowd. I wanted them to hear this. I wanted the witnesses. "This man," I boomed, shaking the document, "signed a legal affidavit yesterday. He swore to Herein Capital that he had cleaned house. He swore he had removed all non-essential dependents to secure his funding." I looked at Vanessa. She was standing 5 feet away. Her face was ashen. Her hand was trembling so violently that the champagne in her glass was rippling. "He threw his grandson out on the street," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "He threw his son-in-law into the gutter, and he called it efficiency." I turned back to Preston. "But you didn't read the fine print of the loan agreement, Preston. Clause 14, Section B. The borrower must maintain family stability as a condition of character collateral." Preston's mouth fell open. That's not a real clause." It is when I write the contract, I snapped. By admitting you abandoned your family, you triggered a bad actor default. You proved you are a liability. You proved you cannot be trusted with assets.
I took the thick packet of papers, the foreclosure notice, the default judgment, the eviction order, and I slammed them into his chest. Thwack! The sound was heavy, final. Preston clutched the papers by reflex. He looked down at the cover page. Notice of immediate foreclosure. Plaintiff, Orion Capital Trust. Defendant, Sterling Holdings. This isn't a check, Preston, I said. It's a call on collateral. I'm calling the note. All of it. The $400 million, plus interest, plus penalties. I can't pay that, Preston whispered. He looked like he was going to vomit. I don't have that kind of liquidity. You know I don't. I know. That's why I'm taking the house. The house, and the tower, and the cars, and the art. I leaned in close. And the purple robe.
Vanessa let out a sharp, strangled cry. The champagne glass slipped from her fingers. Smash. Crystal exploded on the marble floor. Champagne splattered onto the hem of her $12,000 emerald dress. She didn't notice. She was staring past me. She was staring at the shadow. Mark stepped forward. He reached up and untied his black mask. He pulled it off, revealing his face. Clean-shaven, jaw set, eyes burning with a fire she had never seen before. "Mark," she breathed. She took a step toward him, her instinct to manipulate kicking in even through the shock. "Mark, baby, tell him. Tell your father he can't do this. We're family." Mark looked at her. He looked at the woman who had stood on the balcony drinking coffee while his father fished an inhaler out of the mud. "Family?" Mark asked. His voice was steady. It was the voice of a man who had finally found his spine. Family doesn't have an ROI, Vanessa. Family isn't a line item you cut to save the budget. "I didn't mean it," she sobbed, tears cutting tracks through her expensive makeup. "Daddy made me. He said we'd lose everything." "You just did," Mark said. He turned to me. "Finish it, Dad." I looked at the crowd. They were silent, watching the fall of the House of Sterling in real time. "You have 30 minutes, I announced, checking my Patek Philippe. "At 12:35 a.m., the locks will be changed. Anything left inside becomes the property of Orion Capital." "You can't do this," Preston shrieked, scrambling to his feet. "This is illegal. I have rights. I have guests." "Your guests are trespassing on my property," I said. I looked at the crowd. "The party is over," I said calmly. "Please exit to the front drive. The valets have been instructed to retrieve your vehicles immediately." For a second, no one moved. Then the developer I had seen earlier, the one who had toasted to vitality, set his drink down on a table. He turned and walked toward the exit. It broke the spell. The crowd began to surge toward the doors. No one looked at Preston. No one offered him a hand. They were rats fleeing a sinking ship, and they didn't want to get wet. Preston stood in the center of the emptying stage, clutching the foreclosure papers like a shield. "Arthur," he pleaded, his arrogance replaced by pathetic desperation. "Please, we can work this out. I can make you a partner, a real partner." "I don't need a partner, Preston," I said, turning my back on him. "I have a son." I walked over to Mark. I put my hand on his shoulder. "Let's go wait in the car," I said. "I don't like the smell in here." "What smell?" Mark asked, watching Vanessa sink to her knees in the puddle of champagne. "Rot," I said. We walked down the steps of the VIP platform. The path to the door was wide open. The guests parted for us, staring with a mixture of fear and awe at the janitor in the tuxedo and the husband who had returned from the dead. Behind us, Preston began to scream. It wasn't a scream of anger. It was the scream of a man who had looked into the abyss and realized the abyss had a checkbook. "Security! Arrest them! Someone do something!" But the only thing that happened was the sound of the staff beginning to clear the tables. The 30-minute clock was ticking, and I intended to count every second.
Preston didn't go quietly. He went kicking and screaming, the way a child does when a toy is taken away. "Kane!" Preston shrieked, his voice cracking as he spotted the head of security standing by the stage stairs. Kane was a mountain of a man, an ex-Marine who ran the private security for the entire estate.
"Kane, get up here. Arrest this man. He's threatening me. He's forged documents." Kane walked up the steps. His face was granite. He was followed by 4 other guards, all wearing the Sterling crest on their blazers. Preston let out a sigh of relief, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Thank God. Take them, Kane. Take Arthur and his loser's son to the basement holding room. Call the chief of police. I want them buried." Kane stopped in front of Preston. He looked at the frantic little man in the gold mask. Then he looked at me. Kane nodded to me. "Mr. Pendleton, the perimeter is secure." Preston froze. He blinked, his brain misfiring. "What? What did you call him?" "Mr. Pendleton," Kane repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. "The owner." "I am the owner," Preston screamed, spraying spit. "I pay your salary." "Actually," I interrupted, stepping forward, "you haven't paid the security firm in 3 months, Preston. I saw the arrears in the ledger." I adjusted my cufflinks. "So, this morning, Orion Capital purchased the outstanding contract debt of Elite Security Services. We also offered a retention bonus for all staff who wished to remain employed under new management." I looked at Kane. "Did everyone sign?" "Every man, sir. Cash up front." Preston backed away, bumping into the microphone stand. "This is a mutiny." "No," I said. "This is a hostile takeover. Kane, escort the trespassers off the premises. They have 20 minutes left, but I'm tired of hearing them talk." "With pleasure, sir." Kane reached out. His hand, the size of a shovel, clamped on the lapel of Preston's tuxedo, the same way Preston's guards had grabbed Mark days ago. "Get your hands off me," Preston howled, flailing his arms. "Do you know who I am? I am a Sterling." "You're a liability," Kane grunted. He hauled Preston toward the stairs. The other guards moved in, flanking them, creating a wall of muscle that swept the king off his stage. As Preston was dragged away, shouting legal threats that carried no weight, the crowd watched in stunned silence. The king was being taken out like common trash. That left Vanessa. She was standing alone on the stage, the spotlight still hitting her, illuminating the champagne stain on her dress and the ruin of her face. She looked at her father being dragged away. Then she looked at the exit where the guests were fleeing. She realized she was about to be left behind. She realized the Viscount wasn't coming to save her. She turned to Mark.
The survival instinct kicked in. The tears came instantly. Practiced, beautiful tears that had worked on Mark for 7 years. "Mark!" she cried, running across the stage. She threw herself at him, grabbing his arm with both hands. Her nails dug into the sleeve of his Brioni suit. "Mark, baby, please! You have to stop him!" She looked at me with terror, then back at Mark with pleading eyes. "He's crazy! He's hurting Daddy!" Mark stood still. He didn't pull away, but he didn't embrace her. He just looked down at her hands on his arm. "He kicked us out, Vanessa," Mark said quietly. I know," she sobbed, burying her face in his chest. "But I didn't want to. You have to believe me, baby. Daddy forced me. He said he'd cut me off. He said he'd ruin us. I was trying to protect us. I did it for us." It was a masterful performance. A week ago, it would have worked. A week ago, Mark would have melted. He would have held her, apologized for putting her in a tough spot, and promised to fix it. But Mark wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at the diamond necklace she was wearing, the necklace she bought yesterday. He reached up and gently removed her hands from his arm. "You did it for the title," Mark said. "No!" Vanessa shook her head frantically. "I love you. I love Leo. We can be a family again. Look, your dad has money now. We can fix this. We can live here, just like we planned." She was negotiating. Even in her hysteria, she was calculating the net worth. Mark took a step back. He looked at me. I gave him a small nod. "Your play, son." Mark turned back to Vanessa. He looked at the microphone stand that Preston had abandoned.
He walked over to it. The feedback whined slightly as he grabbed the mic. He looked out at the few lingering guests, the staff, and his weeping wife. "You were right, Vanessa." Mark's voice boomed through the ballroom. It wasn't shaky. It was deep, resonant. Vanessa looked up, hope sparking in her eyes. She thought he was about to capitulate. "You told me that Leo's blood was muddy," Mark said. "You told me I was a peasant who didn't understand the Sterling legacy." He paused. "I am a peasant," Mark declared. "I'm a janitor's son, and I'm proud of it. Because peasants know how to survive. Peasants know that you don't sell your children for a dress. The room was deadly silent. You don't want a husband, Vanessa, Mark said, his voice turning cold. And you certainly don't want a muddy son. He leaned closer to the mic. You need a Viscount. Mark let go of the mic. He didn't drop it. He placed it back on the stand with deliberate care. He turned his back on her. Mark! Vanessa screamed, reaching for him.
Kane's second-in-command stepped between them. He blocked her path. "Ma'am," the guard said firmly, "the exit is that way." "No, Mark, don't leave me!" Mark walked toward me. He didn't look back. He adjusted his cuffs, his head held high. "Ready, Dad?" he asked. "Ready," I said. We walked side by side down the stairs, past the weeping woman in the emerald dress, past the overturned chairs, and onto the red carpet. We walked out of the ballroom and into the cold night air. The Rolls-Royce Phantom was waiting at the curb, engine running, warm and safe. Behind us, the sound of Vanessa's wailing faded as the heavy oak doors of the Sterling estate swung shut with a resounding thud. The eviction was complete. The house was clean. We stood on the second-floor balcony, the same balcony where Vanessa had stood 3 days ago, sipping coffee while I knelt in the mud. The wind was biting, but up here, wrapped in victory and wool, we didn't feel it. Below us, the scene at the main gate was playing out under the harsh glare of the security floodlights. Kane and his men didn't rough them up unnecessarily. They were professionals. They simply marched Preston and Vanessa to the edge of the property line, the heavy iron gates swinging open with a groan. "Please!" we heard Preston wail, his voice thin and pathetic in the night air. "I have nowhere to go. My cards are frozen." "Move along, sir." Kane's voice drifted up to us. They stepped through the gateway. Kane pressed the button. The gate slammed shut with a clang that sounded like a prison cell closing. But this time, the prisoners were on the outside. Preston stumbled. He lost his footing on the uneven pavement and fell. He landed hard, his tuxedo splashing into the depression in the landscaping. The mud puddle. The exact same puddle where he had thrown a 6-year-old boy's inhaler. Vanessa stood over him, shivering in the cold, her emerald dress stained, her heels sinking into the soft earth. She looked up at the house. She looked up at the balcony.
She saw 2 silhouettes against the light, the father and the son, the king and the heir. She raised a hand, maybe to wave, maybe to beg. Mark didn't wave back. He took a sip of the scotch I had handed him, a 50-year-old single malt we found in Preston's study. "They look small from up here," Mark said softly. "They were always small, Mark," I said. "We were just looking at them from the bottom of a hole." I reached into my tuxedo jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. I placed it on the stone balustrade between us. "What's this?" Mark asked. "The deed," I said. "It's in a trust. The beneficiary is Leo Pendleton." Mark stared at the envelope. He ran his hand over the paper. He looked at the sprawling estate, the fountains, the manicured gardens, the tower in the distance that we now owned. "I can't live here, Dad," Mark said, looking around. "It smells like them. It's too much."
I took a sip of my drink, savoring the burn. I looked at the massive crystal chandelier through the French doors behind us, then down at the janitor's hands that had acquired it all. "We'll burn the furniture," I said. "We'll paint the walls. We'll get rid of the gold lions and put up pictures of Leo." I clinked my glass against his. "Besides," I added, a small smirk touching my lips, "I think the janitor's quarters at the cabin are a bit too small for a boy like Leo." Mark smiled. It was a real smile, the first one in years. "Yeah, they are." "Let's redecorate," I said. We turned our backs on the street, leaving the Sterlings in the mud where they belonged, and walked inside to warm up.